So the film that I'm going to pitch to you today is actually based on a Danish film I saw years ago that really stuck with me. That film is called Bridget, and the premise is basically about a girl who moves to a small town in Wales called Bridget with her dad, and she falls in love with one of the local boys. However, the town is haunted by suicides in the town's youth. This film was actually based on real events that happened in the town with the same namesake. One of the things that really pulled me into it was the authenticity of the story and the characters in the midst of such a dark and strange phenomenon. I knew one day that I would want to capture a similar essence with a story that meant something. And so I created this film, Blackwater Creek, as a story of a man and his son as they try to find solid ground and navigate their way through grief and loss that expresses a message that horrible things happen that sometimes we won't understand, but we need each other to overcome the darkness. So getting into the logline, teenager Gus Humpkins is a quiet, introverted boy who combats a diabolical skeleton lord whom only he can see. After an incident, Gus moves back with his father into his grandfather's house in the town he grew up in that is being plagued with a mysterious cluster of suicides by teens that inhabit the area. Essentially, Blackwater Creep is an indie thriller mystery drama with a dash of dark comedy. Style-wise, the film will follow a more cinematic look similar to that of AMC's The Walking Dead and the color and look of Netflix's Ozark. Tonally, it is dark, smoky, and full of intrigue. Accompanied to the mystery of the story, there are moments of dark comedy that balance out the heavy nature of the premise. Setting-wise, it takes place in the state of Washington in a small fictional town titled Blackwater Creek. The state of Washington is not essential, but the scenery should complement the tone of the story, essentially. The story takes place in a modern-day setting, but there are flashback scenes that takes place in the 1950s. A couple of pivotal characters that I'll get into before I get into the story. So Gus Humpkins is our central character. He's just kind of like a little strange egg. Slightly antisocial, obsessive, kind of dark, but from a young age he became super invested in mime culture because of the concept of silent expression. And Harry is basically our diabolical skeleton lord. Harry is the dark, sarcastic version of Gus. He's about the same height and stature of Gus, but he wears a full-length skeleton costume, much like the one you would find for $20 at Party City. And then Denny Humpkins is Gus's father, and he's basically in his 40s. Since the untimely death of Gretchen Humpkins, his late wife, and Gus's mom, he's been struggling to keep it together. But while he undoubtedly loves his son, he feels really disconnected from Gus, and that's why he's hoping this move will help fix that, and he'll be able to spend more time focusing on family and whatnot. So yeah, we'll get into the story. So, the film begins in the 1950s. There's a woman standing near the edge of a cliff that overlooks Blackwater Lake. She is smiling, and for a moment she looks back as though she is looking at someone. And suddenly she steps forward and falls through the air into the dark abyss of the lake. Fast forward to a time in a modern-day setting. We're in the city of Chicago now, following Denny Humpkins, who is exiting a hospital at the end of his workday. He's a pathologist. He is on the phone with someone, his mistress. He still speaks with her as he makes his drive home, which is a nice suburb outside the city. As he pulls up to his house, he sees several ambulances and police in a fire truck. He drops the call, rushing forward to see a covered body being wheeled out of his front door. This is his wife, Gretchen. Frantic, Denny looks for his teenage son, Gus. Denny tries to comfort him, but Gus does not respond. He just stares at the stretcher. And fast forward a couple months to present day. Denny and Gus are on the road to a small town called Blackwater Creek. They are moving in with Denny's father / Gus's grandfather, Ed, who runs the town funeral home. The Humpkins have been in this town for generations, but it was not until Gus went through a traumatic bullying experience and Denny got a job offer in Chicago that both Gretchen and Denny decided to relocate. As they are driving into the town, Denny tries to talk to Gus about, new beginnings and how this will be a good thing, and Gus blatantly ignores him by putting headphones in his ears. And now they arrive at Ed's house, which is directly next to their funeral home. This is where we get our first look at Ed, who is sitting on the porch with a half-empty glass and a bottle of whiskey. Essentially, Ed is the type of old man who owns the house in the neighborhood that kids would be scared to trick-or-treat at. And once Denny and Gus get settled in, they have a family dinner. Conversation is sparse, as Ed mostly just drinks his whiskey, and Gus couldn't care in the slightest about talking to his father or his grandfather. And Gus retreats to his room, and then Denny knocks on the door as he attempts to have a heart-to-heart, but not much results from it. Denny leaves, and Gus goes toward the mirror. He starts to paint his face as a mime. He talks about silent expression as an art form, and this is when we meet Harry. Harry criticizes Gus, but they converse for a few moments till Gus cuts him off by putting in his headphones. Now, the next scene takes place in Gus's dream, and he is taken back to the day his mother died. He walks in the house, hears a clatter, another loud noise. He walks down the hall, but before it is revealed of what happened, he wakes up. He's confused. Here we find out that Gus does not exactly remember what happened that day, and as his mind is blocked his memory. Excuse me. Christ, sorry. He gets up and gets ready for his first day of school. As he is leaving, there's a knock on the door. Here we meet Jimmy Stevens, Gus's old childhood friend. They reconnect as they walk towards the high school with snide comments from Harry. As they walk, however, Gus catches a glimpse of a girl in the woods. He blinks, and then she is gone. He brushes it off. But once they get to the high school, Jimmy introduces Gus to his friend group that hangs out in the parking lot before school starts. It's a misfit group of teens. This is where we meet another pivotal character, Evelyn Palmer. Evelyn eyes Gus, and Harry starts to get very critical of Gus, building up his anxiety. So when Jimmy starts to introduce Gus, but when Gus goes to speak, all that comes out of his mouth is vomit. Everyone is amused, but no one really gives him like a hard time because they're just chill guys, you know. And Gus starts to get acclimated at the high school. At one point, he's walking down the hall by himself, and this is when he sees posters of a missing girl. This is the same girl that Gus saw in the woods earlier. Lunchtime hits, and as Gus and Jimmy are sitting with their group, you know, the typical bonehead jock, Bryce Woods, comes up to the table with his posse. Now, Bryce was the kid that bullied Gus back in the day. Excuse me. Things with Jimmy and Bryce get kind of heated because Jimmy goes to defend Gus, and then a monitor intervenes, but Bryce leaves Gus with a threat. After lunch, Gus is sitting in class. He looks out the window and sees the girl again. Gus is startled, heads out for the restroom. Harry is in his ear, and they start to argue, and then Gus eventually exits outside and heads towards the clearing he saw the girl at. He spots her again, and she leads him to the lake we saw in the beginning. Now, Gus hears someone walk up towards the dock, so he hides. It's one of the kids from the lunchroom, Bryce's friend. The boy walks all the way down the dock, pulls out a gun, puts it to his head, and shoots. The next scene is after the fact. Gus is sitting by himself in a funeral home lobby, wrapped in a blanket. Denny is talking to a police officer, and the officer pulls him aside. The officer asks Denny if he would consider replacing the current pathologist who is looking to retire, then adds that his daughter's almost Gus's age. Denny agrees to perform an autopsy. Now, Denny and Gus head into the house. Denny questions Gus about why he was at the lake, but Gus is kind of just shooken up, so Denny lets it go and tells him to go get some rest. Now, Denny pours himself a drink and joins Ed in the living room. Ed has a bottle in one hand and a small photograph in the other. They allude to what happened in the past, and Ed states that history is repeating itself. Ed looks at the photograph. It is a woman in the first scene who jumped off the cliff. It has a love note written on the back. Now, this brings us into Act 2. Gus is stuck in his usual nightmare. He gets close to the corner, is about to see his mother, and then he wakes up. Gus gets ready for another day of school. As Jimmy and him walk, Jimmy asks about what happened the day before, but Gus doesn't go into detail. As they arrive at the parking lot, Evelyn asks if they want a ditch. The three head out towards a spot hidden in the woods called the rope swing. Meanwhile, Denny is examining the first body. He does several brain scans. As he's working, an old friend, Dana Holt, walks in. Denny and Dana reminisce about the old days, and Denny gets a call from the school. Jimmy, Evelyn, and Gus start heading back towards their home. Jimmy walks by, giving Evelyn and Gus a chance to talk. Gus catches a glimpse of the missing girl again, and Harry puts in his 2 cents as per usual. Now, Gus gets home to an angry Denny. He is grounded for ditching, and his punishment is spending the day with Ed and learning the family trade. Ed is preparing the body of a boy Ed is preparing the body of the boy that Gus saw kill himself. Ed explains the process. Gus questions him about a door to the basement, but Ed gets defensive and tells him to never go down there. Another day goes by. Gus is at school, and Evelyn comes up to tell him that 2 more people died via suicide. It was a couple. Everyone is buzzing around the school. Jimmy tells Gus and Evelyn to meet up after to start investigating. They do the town hall, but once they are there, they find that files are missing, and they date back to when Gus's grandfather was a teenager. And meanwhile, Ed is in the basement of the funeral home. He pages through several old pictures and journals. It looks as though he tried to figure it out before. Denny is at the and while all that's happening, Denny is at the high school in the auditorium. He is speaking to a room full of parents. He states that he hasn't found anything yet. The principal says to keep their children close. As the trio starts on their way home, Evelyn separates her house, leaving Jimmy and Gus. Jimmy encourages Gus to ask her to the upcoming Halloween dance. Gus considers this. Gus is sitting in his room writing in his journal, talking with Harry. And Denny comes in, and Gus lies and says that he's talking on the phone. Denny and Gus talk. Gus reassures him that he's fine, and Denny informs him that another kid is dead, but this one's only 14. The next day, Gus and Evelyn are at the rope swing waiting for Jimmy. Once Jimmy arrives, they discuss what they know. And Jimmy gets a call, and he has to head out. After he leaves, the storm picks up bad. Gus and Evelyn flee through the woods and try to get to the road. Instead, they find an old shelter that's falling apart, but no cell service. The power cuts out as Denny is working on another autopsy. Dana runs in, letting him know the entire town is out. Denny calls Ed to find out that Gus is not home. Him and Dana try to drive around and find him. Here's where both Denny and Dana get a heart-to-heart with each other, as well as Evelyn and Gus. Basically, both of our main characters are starting to open up now. And the storm clears by morning. Gus wakes up, holding Evelyn. He looks around outside and sees the girl. She puts a finger over her mouth. Evelyn wakes up and they head back. Denny gets his car pulled out of the ditch, and him and Dana part ways after making plans, but then Denny gets a call, and his face falls. Gus is in his room trying to brainstorm ways of how to ask Evelyn to the dance. He comes up with an idea just as Denny comes to talk to him and ends up leaving the house before Denny can get a word in. So Gus is at the library, and he decided to make her a little mix on a burner disc with the big question on there. So as he's walking home, Harry starts to become really overbearing. Gus sees the girl again, and Gus chases her to the cliff that overlooks the lake. She jumps into it, and then Jimmy comes up behind him, scaring him. They have a talk about how Gus feels like he's losing his mind. So Jimmy tells Gus that he loves him like family and that he should definitely go and ask Evelyn. Gus gets up, but Jimmy says he's going to stay a while. Gus is teetering with energy as he gets home. However, when he walks in, he sees Denny and Ed sitting at the table with almost an empty bottle of whiskey. Denny breaks the news to Gus that Jimmy killed himself the night of the storm. Gus flees to Evelyn's house and she offers him comfort. Gus vows to get to the bottom of what's going on. While Ed is preparing Jimmy's body at the funeral home the next day, Gus stares. When Ed leaves the room, Gus starts for the basement door. As he enters, he finds all the paper clippings, the pictures, the journals. Suddenly, Ed walks in, and Ed explains that there's no rhyme or rhythm to this. At least he couldn't figure it out. Everyone he loved died. And Gus is horrified. Gus attends the funeral with Evelyn. Afterwards, Gus gives her the burner disc, and they agree to still go. The next scene, Gus is dressed in essentially the same skeleton outfit that Harry wears. He's in the school parking lot. He looks up to the missing girl staring at him, smiling. She points at his hands, and they're covered in blood. Gus wakes up. It was a dream. Gus heads out and goes to the lake. As he's on the dock, he looks up at the cliff and sees the woman we saw in the flashback. Gus runs up to the side of the cliff and is like he's watching a memory. The woman looks back, but she is looking at a young man, Ed. Ed starts for the ledge, but he is too late, and she falls. Gus runs through the wood, but falls and hits the ground hard. When he comes to, he meets eyes with Jimmy. Gus asks if he is real, but Jimmy just warns him that he needs to find Evelyn. So Gus steps into the school dance full skeleton garb. He searches everywhere for her, but he can't find her. Bryce follows in step, and Gus exits towards the parking lot, and in the midst of his panic, his memory of what happened that day to his mother comes back. He realized that he watched her set herself on fire and kill herself. Bryce hits Gus, and they brawl, but Gus gets the upper hand and can't stop hitting him until he looks at his hands. He stops and runs off. Gus tears through the woods, heading for the rope swing. He is correct in his guesses. When he gets there, he sees the rope wrapped around Evelyn's neck as she walks aimlessly forward. He is almost at the edge when Gus wraps his arm around her waist, pulling her to safety. She comes to and starts crying, and then Gus looks up to see a multitude of people standing in the woods, the ones who died. After a moment, they retreat to the darkness, including Harry. And then this brings us pretty much to Act 3. So 2 months later, Gus looks healthier than ever. There have been 0 deaths since he stopped Evelyn. He even hugs his dad as he heads out the door of his home. Now, Gus is sitting near the edge of a cliff writing in his journal. He explains that Bryce ended up being okay, Evelyn and him are going strong, but he still has not been able to explain the events of Blackwater Creek. He mentions that everyone has their own personal demons. Sometimes they're good at keeping them hidden. Sometimes we hide them from ourselves. He's not sure what started it, but he knows it's over for now. Evelyn comes up behind him and kisses him on the cheek. Gus continues to write. You can't go through life alone. Sometimes all you need is someone to pull you back and give you a new perspective. And that's where this film ends. So yeah, that was my film Blackwater Creek. Sorry I kind of went a little bit over that 10-minute mark, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you guys, and I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season and a Happy New Year.